Today, I want to talk about the killing of Jordan Neely, who was a homeless black man in New York City. He was killed after being put into a stranglehold, a chokehold, however you want to term it, by an ex-Marine named Daniel Penny. This was an ex-Marine originally from Long Island, and he's been living in Queens. And there was this altercation around, it seems like it's 1 p.m. or 2 p.m. or so in New York. It happened actually this past Monday. And this is an interesting case for a lot of reasons. But I think overall, the thing that maybe shocked me the most about these details is just watching the reaction, kind of like from all sides, but especially from conservatives. And what's special about the reaction now in particular is just it's just a total dearth of any kind of common sense, right? You would normally associate, or at least the public image that conservatives like to cultivate, the total lack of common sense and just kind of any thinking about why you do certain things or procedures or whatnot just completely goes out the window, right? And I think there's an interesting set of comments from there. Later on, I'm actually going to discuss one commentator in particular, this guy named Richard Hanania or Richard Hanania, not exactly sure how to pronounce his name, but he's been on my radar for the past month and a half, because it seems like whenever we have street crime, he always has like some sort of take, right, on the kind of like the latest news, right, in that regard. But anyway, I'm going to have a discussion of some of his comments. And I'm also going to tease a little story now, but I'm going to give you the full story in a little bit. I mean, I have experience in situations like this. I remember one time, a long time ago, I had to actually hold somebody down in this sort of position, right? Not a chokehold, right? Which is what I'm going to be discussing, right? The kind of thinking process involved, right, in these kinds of choices. But I had to hold somebody down for about 15 minutes. And I remember the thing that made me angriest about it is the fact that I had to wait like 15 minutes or whatever it was for security to get there, right? And my entire intention was to minimize any kind of harm, while also, this is the important part, and this is what I mean by a total lack of common sense. I had to wait to actually offload responsibility to someone in authority, right? There are people that have a monopoly use of force, right? I am not one of them. But anyway, let's get into some of these specifics, right? So Jordan Neely, right? This is a picture of Jordan. This must have been before 2013, right? You could actually sort of tell by his face, and to sort of like, tease that little story a little more, right? This was a person that I had to hold down that had significant mental health issues when he was on versus when he was off his medication. And you could tell just by a person's face sometimes, perhaps maybe what they're going through, the sort of mindset that they're in, whether or not, if they have issues going on, whether or not they're currently in some sort of treatment and being taken care of appropriately, so they're not a danger to themselves or to others. Right. And you could sort of tell here, right, this must have been before 2013, starting in 2013, and it seems like the worst of this man's mental health issues started to accelerate. We're going to get into some of the specifics and the timelines there. But so this was a man who they call him a Michael Jackson impersonator. I don't know if that's actually the technical term. There seems like almost like something slightly illegal about it, like impersonator, right? He's an imitator, right? He's a Michael Jackson imitator. And he would go around doing these sorts of, I guess, dances on the subway, perhaps for money, right? I've never, I've been in New York City for a very long time, but I never came across him even back then. But eventually, right, he took this turn for the worse. He grew up with, so like when he was 14, his mother was murdered, and she was stuffed in the suitcase. He had to actually testify at the trial. Soon after that, that's when relatives and friends said that he started developing PTSD, schizophrenia, other problems. So from 2007 to 2013, we have maybe a little bit of a normalcy where you could catch him in situations like this, and then just kind of all downhill. Essentially, from the time it seems like he was 20 years old up until his death now at 30. So just to give a little context as far as like what was going on, here are the details of the killing. Right, so I'm getting this from Wikipedia simply because, I mean, this is all fairly recent and news is coming out all the time. Let me just refresh this. Perhaps there's been like some items sort of added. All right, so this kind of like puts everything together. I'm also going to add some commentary based on witness statements and things like that from news stories that didn't quite make it into this article. So it says on May 1st, 2023, I believe it was this Monday, Jordan Neely, a 30-year-old black homeless man, was killed by a 24-year-old ex-Marine while riding the F train in the New York City subway. So the important pieces in terms of his behavior, right? He was acting, quote, according to some witnesses, in a hostile and erratic manner, right? He was yelling that he was hungry and thirsty. Of course, he was homeless, and that he would hurt anyone on the train. Despite his complaints, Neely did not physically attack anyone. The Marine approached Neely from behind, placing him in a 15-minute chokehold until Neely was unconscious. Right, so it was ruled a homicide, right, died from compression of the neck. Originally, when the news story started coming out, it was sort of phrased in such a way that it seemed as if he came up to the Marine and threw the Marine's jacket or something at the Marine or something belonging to the Marine. But in fact, that's not what the altercation was, right? He threw his own jacket, right? So he's having a mental episode and he's throwing his own jacket on the ground, standing around, he's going in, he's yelling, right? He's sort of, let's call it making a speech, right? That's the way that it was characterized by Juan Alberto Vazquez. He was the guy who, he actually made a Facebook post about this. It was all in Spanish, so I don't know if he even speaks English or what, but he was the man that captured this on video. So he said that Neely, quote, started to make a speech while riding an F train, screaming, "I don't have food, I don't have a drink, I'm fed up. I don't mind going to jail and getting life in prison. I'm ready to die." Right? He then took off his jacket. This caused the chokehold. Now, the interesting part to me, like I said, is, you know, what exactly is warranted in that kind of situation, right? You have somebody that is behaving erratically. You could say that he's not making any direct threats to any individual on the train, but he's just generically just kind of essentially losing his mind. If you're in New York City and you're constantly around these kinds of situations, right, most of the time what you do is you just kind of ignore it, right? Most of the time you don't look at people. There's something going on, right? You don't deal with it because in over 99% of these situations, right, people just like stop and they go away, right? They de-escalate themselves. Right, you don't have to start it, especially if you see somebody that's clearly homeless and clearly having some sort of episode, right? You don't really engage, you don't really say anything, you just sort of let them air it out, and that's it, right? In the vast majority of situations, this is simply how it transpires, this is what happens, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. What this man did, as he was sort of like jumping into you know, like trying to like have this intervention, his first intervention was, as soon as the jacket gets dropped on the ground, his first intervention was, allow me to go up from behind from this guy, surprise him, put him into a chokehold, get him on the ground, and calm him down, right? So immediately what I noticed right away is this is a very significant escalation. You're doing a maneuver that could very easily kill somebody. Yeah, actually, before Eric Garner, one of the controversies was Eric Garner was killed by a cop by way of a chokehold. The chokeholds were not allowed. They were just procedurally not allowed. I'm not exactly sure what the penalties would be legally speaking, if there are any, right? Oftentimes there are no penalties for cops whatsoever. But anyway, the chokehold maneuver was banned for that reason. It's just considered just way too high stakes. People don't behave exactly how you want them to behave. I mean, imagine you put somebody in a chokehold and your intention is to get them to stop struggling. Well, if you're pressing too hard on their neck and they can't breathe, they cannot actually communicate to you very easily that they can't breathe, except they physically start to resist, right? It's very logical, especially if it's like those last few seconds or the last minute of breath before, either total panic has already set in or something akin to it. They're gonna start struggling with you, obviously, right? So the first thing that I noticed about the situation is just how quickly the escalation went to something that was just like very dangerous, right? And the reason why, especially here, is just kind of like especially troubling, is actually similar to what made the Eric Garner situation so troubling. So this is, and in fact, in many respects, it's even worse, right? Because of just like physically what's involved, right? And the physicality of each person. So this is Jordan Neely, and this is Daniel Penny, okay? This guy, as far as I can tell, he's something like maybe 5'8", 5'9", perhaps 130 pounds. He was already homeless, obviously, during this altercation. He was complaining that he hasn't eaten, that he was thirsty, right? He's probably in a weakened state. This guy was a lacrosse player in high school, right? There was actually a Twitter thread going around with some unnamed sources, right? Who knows if this is true or not? But after they found his information, people were saying things like, yeah, I went to high school with him and he always really, really scared me, right? And my friends were always, I mean, who knows to what extent this is true, right? There's probably going to be a trial here. But the fact is, right, this is a guy that actually originally, whenever I read these stories and I see like ex-Marine and it's kind of like of recent vintage, I immediately think like, well, why aren't we examining what the fuck you were doing in Iraq? What the fuck were you doing in Afghanistan? Right? What were you doing in any of these places? Was this kind of like the behavior that you were engaging in? Except, of course, over there, forget about like anything being captured on video, right? Everything would be totally swept under the rug if he was engaging in any kind of, extrajudicial security in this way. But it turns out actually that he was just like some sort of like sergeant trainer in North Carolina, right? I don't think he even was deployed, but maybe I'm wrong about that, right? But it's kind of like a guy, right? And he wrote that he joined the Marines because he wanted adventure. So this is a guy that he's by all intents and purposes, he seems like he's a jock, right? He went to high school, played varsity lacrosse, right? Was a surfer, eventually ended up in the Marines. So he's nicely built, you could tell, right, by his body, nice and strong. Versus a man that, again, right, he's 6 years older, 24 versus 30, right? Neely was 30 when he died, homeless, weak, right? So that's kind of the first situation. Here's a guy that's clearly stronger and bigger than this other person, and he decides to escalate in the most kind of like, it's not as dangerous, obviously, as like pulling out a gun and start threatening somebody. But as far as like the physical moves that you could make without a weapon, that's one of the highest stakes. Now, if you watch the video, which I can't show because if I do, this is going to get is either going to get banned or they're going to throw on some sort of like you got to sign in to watch this video label. But if you watch the video, you see 3 men in the video holding down this guy. Right? Again, think of the Eric Garner situation. Multiple cops, right? Of course, Eric Garner is much larger, right, than any of the cops there. But there were 4 people, and the only thing they were able to do was to choke this guy to death, right? That always struck me as a totally, insufficient point of the discussion. So maybe I shouldn't be so surprised that from 2014 to now 2023, going to be 2024 in less than a year, right? The kind of like level of common sense is going down. But we have 3 grown men, right? 3 grown-ass men, and their contention is that there was no other way to subdue a hungry, thirsty, skinny, homeless man who's probably in a state of like sustained chronic weakness. Okay? Now, there was a 4th man actually that's not in the video, but you could hear him in the back of the video. He's sort of saying something about Desert Storm. I think it's possible that he's referring to the idea that he himself was also a Marine during Desert Storm. And he's essentially just like talking about chokeholds, right? He's saying stuff like, "Oh, damn, like you really got him and you really surprised him, right? He wasn't expecting that kind of chokehold to come from out of nowhere." Well, yeah, no shit, right? This is kind of like the point at issue. And at some point, he starts sort of telling him something like, "Hey, like just like watch out when they stop, responding, when they stop moving, and then they defecate themselves, that's when you got to let go." So, essentially we have two grunts. We have an ex-Marine grunt, and then we have another guy who seems to be an ex-Marine grunt. And again, this is all audible on the video, right? That's another point that's not really being discussed. And they are essentially, doing this camaraderie over the fact that both of them are these like dumbass grunts. And one of them is actually doling out advice on the proper use of chokeholds, what to expect. And near the end, he even says something like, "Don't worry about it. He's going to be all right." Essentially saying like, "Oh, he's alive. He's going to live. This is fine. I've seen this many times before." Now, I don't know if Jordan Neely actually defecated himself. This wasn't obvious in the video. But the point is, there's just, two grunts essentially bonding over two very stupid actions. One being a total unnecessary escalation when you have three men around you, a woman, and then a fourth man potentially that could help you out, also being a former Marine. And that sort of like minimum standard was not followed. I mean, I'm not exactly sure how a legal case would shake out if they decide to seek something like, explicit murder charges. But it's pretty clear, based on what witnesses have said so far, what we see in the video, that there was not the kind of threat, that would rise to, right, you have to put a sustained chokehold and all these other men around you, right, they're helping you out, and nobody's telling you to stop. Well, with one exception, actually, in some of the stories that you could read, they quote some witnesses as coming up to Daniel Penny and saying something like, "Oh, by the way, be careful with that chokehold. You don't want to catch a murder charge," right? Probably because they were watching this guy go limper and limper and limper and limper. And at the end of the video, this is another piece that's going to be pretty damning, right, to everybody involved. When that other alleged Marine is sort of like talking about the proper use of chokeholds, somebody answers like, "Oh, he's already limp, right? He already stopped moving." And we see in the video that he stopped moving. And so they're like already aware of this fact, right? So it's like, well, what exactly are you waiting for, right? If the idea was you were going to subdue him until he stopped moving, that was the whole reason for the chokehold. Well, are you essentially waiting for him to not have any oxygen in his brain any longer? What exactly is the plan? Are you waiting for him to lose consciousness? Because at that point, right, you're still going to have, like I said earlier, that movement, right? You're going to have that physicality, because with no way to like actually tell you that he cannot breathe, he's letting you know physically the only way that he can, right? Through those final, right, life pangs. So just to like go over a couple of these situations that I see like being talked about. So like here's a comment from the Gothamist, right? Some reader comments. I'm just looking to see what the discussion is, see like where exactly are we in terms of, how stupid are we as a society, right? How far have we gone that we totally like forget about explicitly, really what rights are, where your rights begin, where somebody else's rights begin, where yours end, right? Nobody's really thinking about that. And I think this comment captures this very nicely. So this was a few hours ago from this commenter named Hav. "No one could possibly know how dangerous this individual was." This is exactly true. You have no idea how possibly dangerous this individual is, which is why you can't just say, "I am fearful, so I'm going to escalate in the maximal way that's available to me," despite seeing a huge discrepancy, right, in size and power between us, right, leverage between us. So no one could possibly know how dangerous this individual was. Keep in mind how the statement is being used as a pretext to essentially, therefore, justify more or less anything that you want to do, right? This is one of those kind of things where conservative thinking, right, they try to, they throw dirt on any kind of, postmodernism, any sort of postmodern movement, any sort of postmodern fractured way of decontextualizing the world and, filling it back up with context and de-objectifying the world and just perspective taking. Well, this is just like the supreme example of perspective taking, where everything is an opinion. There's no such thing as an objective fact. There's only your feelings. And to the extent that you have feelings that are responding to any kind of stimulus, right? Whether or not this is a logically valid or invalid response for your feelings to go in that direction, it all becomes perfectly fine and appropriate because, again, I have no idea how dangerous this person is, right? So you could do absolutely anything that you want in that situation. Now, this part, he was threatening, though. I would concede that, he was being threatening. I mean, he was saying things like, I don't care if I'm going to die. I don't care if I have to go to prison. This is clearly someone that might lash out in some way. But again, that's not really what we're talking about, right? Here's the thing. Like, if we haven't had a video of the chokehold and all that happened was there was this homeless man on the train and he was just like wilding out, as often happens, and somebody just, was scared and they knocked him out, and that was the end of it, we would not hear anything about this. I mean, even if we had a video of that altercation, a homeless man spazzing out, saying things that sound threatening to many people, the best that you could hope for in that situation is it's going to be like one of those, compendia, right? The best New York City subway knockouts, May 2023 would be like a 45-minute video, right, of the top 200 knockouts in the past week, right? And people would look at it, they'd leave some comments, and that would be it, right? This wouldn't be this whole big thing. We cannot fault the response of the commuters on that train. Again, what exactly are we talking about? We cannot fault the response. What level of response can you start faulting? If that ex-Marine had the legal right to concealed carry a gun, right? In New York City, almost nobody has a concealed carry permit unless you're politically connected. But let's say he had a concealed carry permit and he was threatened. This guy, he took out his jacket and he threw him to the ground and he screamed something. So I shot him in the head. I mean, would that be like, he was threatening, right? He was threatening, wasn't he? Right? We can't possibly know how dangerous this individual was. So do we shoot him in the head? Right? Is that an appropriate response? I mean, what do people think? Right? Comments that people should have engaged to de-escalate are ridiculous if trained people are not the ones doing it. Well, it's ridiculous in the sense that your only goal in that situation should be to wait for someone that is trained, someone that actually has the authority to carry all this out. This is the only thing that you have to do really in that situation, right? Well, the number one thing is like make sure I don't even want to say that number one, make sure that you don't die. Like if you do something you're not supposed to do, and this guy feels like he's like, imagine if this guy had a gun, right? Imagine if Jordan Neely had a gun. And imagine if in those last moments that we see in the video, it is literally, his life is exiting his body, right? He's not able to breathe anymore. That's literally what we're watching. Imagine if that final situation, during that final escalation, he decides to take out a gun and then he shoots the ex-Marine in the head. Comments about removing yourself from the situation are ridiculous in an enclosed moving subway car. It just makes me wonder, is this guy, commenting, like, is he actually from New York City? Have you ever, never moved subway cars because there was, something going on that you didn't like? It could be something as simple as there was a homeless person there that was taking up half the cart and was extremely smelly, and you couldn't be there for your 45-minute ride. It could be as simple as that. I've gone to a different train cart. I remember one time there was a homeless guy that was like 20 years ago, pulled out he was drunk. He was literally drinking on the train, pulled out a knife, started going crazy. He actually looked like he was about to like, fall over. He was like losing his balance and stuff. But I was like, all right, whatever the situation is here, I'm not gonna like fight him with a knife. I'm just gonna like move subway cars, which is what I did. Moved subway cars. And that was a situation from 20 years ago, right? Obviously, I have many, many more situations in the intervening 20 years, right? So this kind of thing where you remove yourself from a bad situation in the subway. It is so actually common to me, and it's so like second nature to me, that it's not, it's not even worth responding to, right? This is somebody that has never been in this kind of situation, because I can guarantee you with how scared he sounds that he would immediately just run the fuck out of that train. Or, just as reasonable to say that this is not somebody in New York City, has never been in these situations, and he's just kind of like opining like from a distance. He's asking, where are you going? Well, bitch, I'm telling you where I'm going. I'm going to the other cart. Now, this part I do agree with. What is not irrelevant is the underlying conditions in our city that leaves suffering individuals to roam the streets and shelter in the subways. This is true, right? We have something like, I believe the estimate is like 75,000 homeless people in New York City. I would double that just to be safe. Let's say 150,000. If you decide to embark on some kind of program for $1,000 a month per individual, where you provide them housing, and you provide them food, a refrigerator. We're not talking about a shelter. We're talking about like a unit that they could go in, that they could shower in, that they don't have to share with other people, that are not, their roommates are not drug addicts. Their roommates are not people that are possibly involved in street crime, right? They have their own kind of place to live. If you can imagine that, 150,000, right, times 1,000, that's $150 million spent to literally overnight, right? Overnight, it would totally resolve homelessness, and it would resolve not every situation like this. Obviously, you're not going to force everybody into some sort of, free unit, free food, go sleep, go shower, go take care. Not everybody's going to take that, especially if they're, in such a bad kind of mental state. But generally speaking, the vast majority of these situations would be resolved. The cost of that is 150 million or so, I would say. Could be a bit less, it could be a bit more. The reason why I say it could be a bit less is when you actually think about the, economics of all these situations. So this is an organization that I really like, a City Harvest. Right, they claim that for every dollar donated, it helps us provide food for 2 New Yorkers for a day. Even if you assume that homeless people are just so greedy and profligate, and actually they would take so much food, they want to take other people's rations as well. So this dollar a day is actually only good enough, not for 2, but for only 1 New Yorker, right? Let's assume they're twice as profligate, right? This homeless population. So this twice as profligate homeless population, for $1 a day, which means $30 a month, they could potentially be fed. Now, if you want to, I don't know, throw in some supplements in there, some other shit, right? Maybe that's going to go up to $100 a month. Maybe it's going to be higher. Who knows, right? Who knows about some of these estimates? But generally speaking, when you think about the economics involved, right? Not personally what you do when you go to a store. I understand that you spend a lot more money on food, right, than something like this, and you get less in exchange for it. But when we get to these kinds of agencies, especially if this isn't a city agency, but if you get to government agencies, $1 could potentially go a very, very long way, right? Which is how I sort of assuming we could find a way to house a person, right, for $1,000 a month. Right, provide food for $1,000 a month, provide some level of healthcare for $1,000 a month, right? If we have state agencies involved, something like making sure that there's no homeless people in New York City, that's $150 million, but that's probably going to pay huge dividends down the road, right? That would be an example of proper spending. So I agree with this part of the comment, right? Suffering individuals roam the streets and shelter in the subways. That should not be happening, right? There should always be some sort of solution where this is not the case. 600,000 homeless people in the United States of America. Let's just, for the sake of argument, say it's 1 million. 1 million times 1,000 each. That is $1 billion every single month. that goes to ensuring that there's no such thing as homelessness in the United States. Given what we spend on something like the military, given the fact that the New York City, police budget is much, much higher than 150 million. I believe 150 million was simply what was cut, right, from the Department of Education, much less all these other things, right? So when people say abolish the police, blah, 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 I think you could move 150 million from the police budget and related agencies over to ensuring that people are housed, they don't go around and get themselves deeper and deeper and deeper into trouble. This was the man, right? This is the set of decisions that he made. This is the way that he decided to he maybe thought he was de-escalating, but in a kind of literal sense, I mean, he was very much escalating the situation. And it's not exactly clear, as I said earlier, where he's from, either West Islip or West Babylon. But honestly, when I do this kind of research, and a lot of people don't do enough of this, right? Maybe because they're scared of what they would find. But I like to walk around, right, some of the neighborhoods where people are from, right? When I was doing the Kyle Rittenhouse stuff, I spent a long time walking around Kenosha, right? I wanted to know, what exactly are the conditions in this place that would allow people to routinely, not even routinely, but even one time have a riot? I've often said this before. Although I live in a black neighborhood, there's an almost exclusively black neighborhood, maybe a 10-minute walk from me. And one thing that's fascinating to me in that area is the fact that if anything goes on in New York City that would warrant some sort of riot, like all the typical things. Well, usually what happens with a riot is almost always it's some sort of police brutality. Usually it's like a police killing of someone, but just police brutality in general. Virtually all race riots actually begin with an episode of police brutality that gets either in the news or gets passed around the neighborhood. But I often say, whenever shit goes down, right, in the broader neighborhood, it's never going to percolate to the richer, sort of retired. There's a mix of people, right? They're either older black people who are retired, or they are very young black people that are either in, in their early 20s, mid 20s, like in finance or in crypto, or perhaps they're entertainers. I once saw this a Mercedes tour bus come out with these really, really thick, slim, thicky ladies coming out, right? So there's probably some kind of touring going on there. They would never riot in that scenario, right? Because they have other ways to express their rage, right? And they have too much to lose by rioting, right? And this is an example, right? West Islip, New York, of a place that is not going to be prone to riots for the reasons that I said. All right, here's West Babylon. Let's walk down one of these streets, see what these houses look like. Wow, right? When I was walking here this morning, I thought, damn, it would be so nice if this was the place that I grew up at when I was a kid, right? Because when I was a kid, I was worried about evictions frequently. In fact, I was in 4 different high schools actually, because in a bunch of the houses that I lived in New Jersey couldn't make rent. So we would have to leave, right? So I was always worried about eviction. I always had sort of homelessness in the back of my mind, right? Maybe in retrospect, that was a little silly because it never actually got to there. But, I grew up with these kinds of material insecurities. And I often thought damn, wouldn't it be nice if I could just live in a normal family, right? Under normal conditions, under the normal kind of experiences the children get to experience, and the stuff that I would see watching the Wonder Years, right? Or, even not the Wonder Years, even if you watch some sort of urban show or street show, right? You always tended to have functional families, functional relationships. And I often saw that and thought damn, if only I could have a normal kind of state of existence. Now, on another level, of course, right, there's a cost to that, right? If I had a totally normal kind of existence, one of the ironies is that I would not be doing a video like this. I would not be writing what I write. I would be very much in a kind of bubble. I wouldn't have the kind of broader range of experience that I have. I would be essentially this guy, right? Why would a West Babylon man who has essentially everything handed to him, why does he decide to suddenly just like join the military and go in, and he said himself, to be on an adventure? These places, right? Say what you want about where I grew up, but these places are fucking boring. Boring. When you think of drug problems, this is one of the crazy things. From the outside, when people think like, oh yeah, New York City public schools, like they're so bad, there's the drug problems. No. Drug problems are going to be in a situation like this. So this guy, right, just totally bored. There were 4 other men, if you count that alleged other Marine, that could have helped you, right? This is a 135, 130, 140 pound, 5'8", 5'9" homeless man. You could have done something other than putting him in a chokehold until he died. And let me actually begin, right, with people that say otherwise. So this is a photo of Richard Hanania. I'm highlighting this photo because he was actually very proud of having, for whatever reason, taking this photo. He even made a gender transition joke for whatever reason surrounding this photo. And he's a conservative commentator. And the reason why he's been on my radar recently is whenever there's anything that happens, I mean, he sort of views himself as a kind of like heterodox conservative thinker, right? He doesn't stand for the typical, reactionary right-wing bullshit that we've come to understand from reactionaries in America. But, with like any kinds of psychology, whether it's like liberal psychology, right, or conservative psychology, people just like you give them enough inputs and they can't really help themselves, right? So one way that he's absolutely not heterodox at all is the fact that he's always making a point to comment on these sort of like, let's just call them like street crime situations, right? I remember, for instance, he posted this thing. The reason why it's deleted is because he had to delete it, right? So Richard Hanania, or Hanania, not exactly sure how to pronounce his name. He was basically like posting this video from Chicago where a woman, or perhaps the man that she was with, not exactly clear, was attacked by like a large group of teenage kids. And he said something along the lines of, well, look, pogroms, racial pogroms are actually happening at like alarming rates in America. But the victims and the targets are not who you think they are, right? And he was basically just sort of like making the comment, I guess, that really it's white people that are being preyed upon in these racial pogroms by Black Americans and by Hispanics or by whoever else in America. This is clearly like a comment from somebody who has never been in any kind of dangerous situation in his life, right? So the tweet that I subtweeted, so saw this on Reddit and thought, meaning I saw that video on Reddit and I thought, this is Richard Hanania's, or Richard Hanania, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce his name. This is Richard Hanania's next post. Anyway, an ignorant statement which reveals much about the speaker's upbringing, social circles, and fears, has never been in dangerous situations, and doesn't understand predation. A virgin writing treatises on threesomes. Hopefully I pronounced that right. Now, my pronunciation is not always perfect, as you have seen. If you're actually somebody, you as a white person, let's say, for a very long period of time, have lived in areas that were, primarily Black, right? Or you went to a primarily Black high school, as my high school was. You actually, in those situations, you actually start to understand things very, very quickly, right? One thing that I've come to understand very quickly is the fact that my experiences in my neighborhood right now, they are actually very different from other people's experiences in this neighborhood. Right now, for me, I have a much more, it seems, pleasant experience living here than my neighbors do. My neighbors, they have told me stories about times when they've either been mugged successfully or unsuccessfully. They've told stories about, being jumped by a big group of kids and, then like getting the car and then kind of like roving around trying to like find them and beat them up, like typical street shit that you would see. Another neighbor told me she was sitting in her car, another car pulled out a gun, was threatening her, and then just drove off. Like, even in those kinds of situations, honestly, even in those kinds of situations, usually nothing even transpires. I mean, that should be common sense. The majority of times when, a gun is seen or involved or whatever, it usually does not end in somebody's murder. Another neighbor, right? And I should have heard this for whatever reason, but I must have slept through it. It was like the middle of the night. He got into some sort of altercation with somebody. I don't know exactly what the context was. And it was like midnight or past midnight, and they were just like banging in, trying to get in the house, kicking the doors, trying to like break stuff apart, trying to get in. And so I keep hearing about these stories, right, that other people tell me. And the one thing that I'm noticing is everybody that's telling me this story, right, they don't look like me, right? They're not white. And here I am. I'm walking around everywhere, right? I'm walking to the west side of my neighborhood, to the east side, to the north side, to the south side, 20, 30, 40 block radii. I go to the industrial sections, high asthma rate, that kind of thing, high pollution. I walk around there. I walk through the parks, right? Despite the fact that I do this morning, day, and night, to the point where like even people that I don't know, they do recognize me. They say things to me. Despite the fact that I'm everywhere all the time, I have literally in like a very long, I'm not talking about 1 or 2 years, a very long time. The only things that I've seen is as follows. I saw before the pandemic, 2 guys breaking into a car. And after the pandemic, I noticed there was a situation where 2 other guys were breaking into in some other place into another car, right? There's a reason why violence does not typically come my way. And it is precisely and exactly based on the fact that I am white. If I'm going to be walking around my neighborhood and I'm going to be I always obviously look like I know where I'm going, right? That's like the first thing that you have to understand, right? I mean, I live here, right? I know where I'm going. You put me in a random street, I'm going to find my way back to my house very easily. Don't worry about it. Doesn't matter where I am. Doesn't matter what time of day. Doesn't matter what time of night. I'm going to find my way pretty quickly without a phone. People don't want to come up to me, right? Because I'm the only white person. And when I walk, the reason why I'm nursing this foot is when I walk extremely fast, right? I walk very, very fast. I have my phone out. I'm doing work. I'm writing on the phone, right? I'm getting stuff done. You don't want to come up to me because I don't look like I belong here, right? I look like I might be a cop. I look like I, might have a gun, right? So that's the first thing that I recognize about Richard Hanania, right? Or Hanania, not exactly sure how to pronounce his name. I noticed right away that the fact that he keeps opining on crime, the fact that he keeps opining on that's what I was saying earlier about like he's not able to like totally escape typical conservative psychology. He's still 100% that guy, right? I mean, you've seen this those like tabloid stories or the news stories, News at 9 or like whatever. Do you know where your children are? All that stuff that's like come to be associated with the 90s. He still has never broken out of that mindset, right? He's still a guy, right? That's like living in the 90s, writing some of these headlines in the 90s, fixated on crime. Why? Because he's probably from situations, right, where he, I don't know if he went to public school, but he probably didn't go to public school, right? At least not for any extended period of time. And if he did, I doubt the people there looked anything other than what he looks like. I doubt he's ever been, physically in a place where he had to either escalate or de-escalate, right? Defend himself in some place. I doubt that has ever transpired for him. So he's essentially this. I mean, he's a virgin writing about threesomes, right? If he had ever lived in the black neighborhood, the first thing he would have noticed is that nobody wants to, forget about, preying on him. Nobody really wants to deal with him, right? And the longer that you stay in these places and the longer that you become a fixture, the less that people want to deal with you, right? Because there's something a little bit off about you. Why are you here? Why aren't you scared walking around? Why do you look like you know where you're going? Oh, does it mean that you're not just like walking around here? You're not just like working here? You're not going to like forget about this place like when you go home for the day? You're actually from here? And I've mentioned this before, but this is the person that I was talking about. So Richard Hanania or Hanania, not exactly sure how to pronounce his name. When he has this kind of commentary, especially the fact that he's like really into like IQ, specifically race and IQ, but he might also be interested in stuff like, I don't know, like, increasing IQ, like I said earlier, right? There's this thing that used to happen in the 90s and 2000s on internet forums, right? When people were like obsessed with lengthening their penises, right? They were jelqing and penis lengthening exercises, right? Now the new thing is, how are we going to increase our IQs, right? That's the new penis lengthening exercise for people that think that they are, they have transcended those kinds of concerns. And one thing that I mentioned before was the fact that for some of these people, some of these like conservative writers, right? And this is a guy that he works for a think tank, and he seems to have written academic papers, but he's so kind of like outside of the sphere of like everyday material, day-to-day reality, right? He's so far outside of day-to-day reality that whenever it like butts up against him, he can't even understand it. He can't even comprehend it. And it made me think of the whole kind of like IQ debate, right? Where people are like, well, there's some people in this world, such as, sub-Saharan Africans who have such low IQs, like sub 70, sub 60, sub 50, they wouldn't even be able to function in society. And what that immediately makes me think of is a situation like this. Well, let's imagine that we try to measure another form of like, if like intelligence or IQ or however you want to phrase it is a measure of like your response and your ability to like cohere and exist and thrive into like reality, or like one form of reality, a specific kind of reality. What about the fact that we have these conservatives who they read all these books and they write all these articles and they spend so much time thinking about crime, right? But they're never actually around it. And physically, like as soon as they're sort of dropped in this kind of situation, right, they become these total virgins. They totally reveal how little they understand of these kinds of like basic dynamics, right, in neighborhoods or just like interpersonally. And it made me think, so if you actually measure their level of, let's say, coherence with that reality, their intelligence in that kind of situation, this guy, Richard Hanania, or Hanania, not exactly sure how to pronounce his name, he would probably score, sub 50 IQ if we could get a measure, right? If we could get a measure of some sort of, relational kind of like back and forth between that aspect of reality, he really would score somewhere in a sub-Saharan style IQ, right? He totally does not belong in the real world, right? As it's lived, for instance, by people like me, right? So this is for him, and just to sort of like show exactly how far, right, he takes and how silly he gets, right? Of course, like as more pieces of the news come out and he starts commenting on all this, this is a tweet that he did highlighting a Reddit thread from 9 years ago. So this happened back in, well, 10 years ago actually now, although it says 9. This happened back in 2013. So, right. So Jordan Neely, right? He used to do these imitations, and somebody on Reddit decided to write this like about 10 years ago, right? So try to stay away from the Michael Jackson impersonator if you see him, right? This was in the Manhattan subreddit 10 years ago. Used to be all cool, dancing to MJ in the subway train, but as of late, he's become a maniac. All right, so keep in mind what's being said. This is a guy who used to be normal, right? You could tell by his face, right? There is at least some level of happiness here. There's some level of coherence and usefulness like within society. And now he's a maniac, right? So we're talking about that from that 2007 period when he's 14, and he understood that his mother was murdered and stuffed into a suitcase, up until whatever this is, 2013. So we have a 6-year window where people say that he's getting progressively more schizophrenic, crazier, stranger, maybe is not used to doing what he used to do, right? In this case, he's not even dancing anymore. He used to dance, right, based on some of the interviews that I've read. He used to dance as a kind of therapy, right, to deal with the PTSD. That's why he was dancing and eventually turned into an act, right? Sometime in late spring, early summer, I saw him in the train, his radio fucked up, and he was angry as fuck, cursing and bad-mouthing commuters, screaming, "What the fuck are you looking at? Don't fucking look at me." Totally didn't expect him to act as such. Ever since that day, he's just been a scary dude to me. He doesn't dress up anymore, no more dancing, just asks for money, occasionally shouting obscenities. Today, however, was odd. Sometime in the morning on my way to school, I'm sitting on the bench and out of nowhere, hear someone just going off, cussing up a storm. It was the MJ dude. Everyone besides this guy was quiet, right? And here's the thing, right? So it seems like for many years, for like 10 years, this guy was doing that again and again and again. It never led to his death. It never led to somebody thinking I'm going to escalate. Now, it is true that he assaulted people, right? He assaulted some woman. He assaulted a man. He was dragging some like little girl like in the street, right? So he definitely was a disturbed guy. But it's interesting to note that there was, most of the time he was just ignored and nothing happened. I would say 99.999% of the situations when he was probably screaming in the train, it seems like it was going on daily. 99.999% of the times, right, nothing actually happened, right? But this is Richard Hanania, or Richard Hanania, don't exactly know how to pronounce his name. This is what he thinks is an appropriate response to this Reddit thread from 10 years ago. You've got to hand it for Jordan Neely. These types often have a long criminal record. They rarely also have a long Reddit paper trail of them terrorizing a city. Leftists sure know how to pick their martyrs. Now, there's a few things here. So Richard Hanania, or Hanania, not exactly sure how to pronounce his name. He's actually a writer. And what's shocking about this tweet is just how absolutely poorly phrased and argued it is. I mean, that's very common, right? If you're a guy who gets paid to write, 99.9% chance you're going to totally fucking suck, right? You're going to suck at your job, right? You are not paid to elucidate. You are paid routinely, right? Think about all the powers that be, right? Whether that's the New York Times, whether that's, the Babylon Bee, whether it's a right-wing rag, whether it's a left-wing rag, you are essentially paid to obfuscate, right? There is money behind whoever is doing the payments, and they have entrenched interests, right? You're not there to actually communicate. And this is just so poorly communicated. So like before we even get to like the meat and the potatoes, right? That's a phrase that I learned recently. The meat and potatoes of the situation. He's saying leftists sure know how to pick their martyrs. And immediately I think, what exactly does this mean, right? Who exactly is doing the picking and the choosing? Because like I said earlier, first of all, if all that happened was this was a homeless man who was wilding out and he was knocked out by someone in the subway and it ended up in some sort of like, compendium video, you wouldn't hear anything about it, right? People would laugh, people would comment, they'd point their fingers, but there wouldn't be any kind of situation, right? It would be a kind of like open shut case. Now, secondarily, if what happened was this man was put in a chokehold and he died, and yet there was no video, or maybe there weren't even witnesses, let's say, probably nothing would have happened either. Like maybe there would have been some outcry, maybe there would have been but without a video, obviously things they're not able to like go anywhere, right? They're not able to actually hit any place. If you're dead without this kind of video evidence, nothing's going to happen really. Nobody's actually picking any martyrs, right? The way that martyrs get made, right? And this is perhaps something for Richard Hanania or Hanania to understand is martyrs are actually, like in the real world, what happens is they get manufactured, right? They get manufactured based on the circumscribed limits of the society that they live in. So for example, if you are born black in New York City, right, you have a much higher chance than average to end up homeless. That's just a fact, right? You have a much higher than average chance of being murdered. You have a higher than average chance of having, various family dysfunctions, school dysfunctions. So you're very likely to be in a bad crime-ridden neighborhood. You're very likely to be in a school that's like not a great school. Again, I'm just speaking from experience, right? I'm not just like bullshitting you. That's how martyrs ultimately are made, right? Because the vast majority of the people that I've just mentioned that would be in these kinds of situations, they don't come out of the other end of it dead, right? They don't come out of the other end of it serial criminals. They don't come out on the other end of it, executed by a cop, right? That usually doesn't happen, right? Most people, they sort of live and work and die in the situation that they're in. But every once in a while, right, human behavior being what it is, which is a probability space, probabilistically, statistically, however you want to phrase it, however you want to geek out about it, what's going to happen is eventually one of these outlier situations are going to hit, and you will become a ready-made martyr. Now, the reason why the word martyr is often appropriate here is if you see, for instance, like the generic homeless person, let's say you're walking through Brownsville and you see some, black guy on the floor in like a puddle of piss, right? He's drunk. You could put up posters of that man. You could say, why aren't we doing anything about the homelessness in New York City? Why aren't we offering housing to these people? You could capture it on video and you could put it up on YouTube. Nobody's going to care, right? Because everybody has walked past, stepped over, or seen, maybe not a homeless man drunk in his own piss in Brownsville, because again, right, people are very, very careful about the neighborhoods that they walk through, right? They're going to be very, very selective, right? They don't want to be in a place that's a little too dangerous, right? They don't want to be in a situation where they get a little scared from a sudden movement or somebody having an episode where then they have no choice but to murder someone, right? They don't want to be in that situation, right? Because think about it, they spend their whole lives fantasizing about, what am I going to do here? Which is honestly why Richard Hanania, which is why like we have like so many of these types on Twitter and elsewhere. We have so many of them essentially like commenting on this because they've prepared their whole lives like watching this from the sidelines. They're very scared to actually be in a situation like this, but all their lives mentally, right? They just keep preparing for this one moment, the one moment when I'm going to have to save a subway car, the one moment when I'm going to have to deal with a real situation, the one and only moment in my entire life. And this is where it gets dangerous, okay? This is where it gets dangerous. The one and only moment in my entire life when I am tested for the first time, not as a 12-year-old, not as an 8-year-old, not as a 16-year-old, not as a 20-year-old, but a 30-something man. For the first time, I'm being tested as a man. I am now in a very hyper masculine situation, right? It's actually very dangerous, right? When we talk about like diversity and inclusion and affirmative action, all that, one of the most obvious answers for why affirmative action or diversity in general, whether it's like linguistic or artistic diversity, like whatever it might be, the reason why diversity is actually so good and so useful and so powerful is by being around all kinds of situations and by being tested in a natural way, right? As a man or as a boy, you don't have to actually spend, your early adulthood and your middle adulthood fantasizing about how you would respond if you do get tested for the first time in your life as a fucking 35-year-old. You won't have to have this kind of explosion that comes out at the other end of it. You actually have an entire lifetime at that point in a diverse setting of dealing with things that make you uncomfortable, dealing with people that don't look like you, that don't act like you, right? That don't have your background. That's actually very useful. That actually will tone down and de-escalate some of these situations naturally. But if you spend your whole life thinking, what am I going to do in this situation, and finally arrives, guess what? You're going to now interpret it as a 35-year-old man, the very first time that I could actually act and be a man. You're going to attach a lot of me. Like if I see a homeless guy spazzing out like that, I don't attach any particular meaning to there, right? Not in the way that this, ex-Marine did, and certainly not the way that Richard Hanania would attach, right? So to just like wrap up this sentence, right? These are not martyrs that are made, right, in the way that Hanania or Hanania thinks. These martyrs are made simply through the course of living. Eventually, you're going to have outliers. This is what they look like. If you take a photo, take a video of a more generic situation, nobody cares, right? The only time that somebody gives a fuck is like if you have a video of George Floyd being literally choked to death in front of you. This is physically what people respond to viscerally, right? And there's always this kind of like unspoken tendency among reactionary types to try to defang that kind of response, right? They try to totally defang it and say, no, 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 no. You cannot use these videos. You cannot use these situations. You cannot make these kinds of appeals. The one thing that's actually left for people to respond to, for people to appeal to, for people to have any kind of response to, that is being systematically taken away. But the most amazing thing, I mean, beyond the fact that it's just so horribly written and he has no idea what he's talking about, and it's just like it's a totally just, this is not a coherent statement, right? To pick their martyrs, just point blank, just not coherent. But I think even the more amazing part of all this is the fact that he's able to read this. And he's so, right, you could just look in his face. He is so absolutely sheltered his whole life, right? He's so sheltered his whole life that he's able to read that thread about a man who in 2007 watches his mother or hears of his mother, I'm not sure exactly what it was, get murdered and stuff into a suitcase, develop all these mental problems as a result, start to cultivate a dance routine to help him through some of these issues. He's able to see that. And he's able to see, well, there was a timeline where this guy was perfectly normal, was not getting arrested, was not in any kind of bad situation. He was just putting on dance routines for money in happy, normal fashion on the subway. And something bad happened here, right? Something bad happened here. And there's no empathy for it. There's no like, wait, what the fuck was the city doing? Why wasn't he offered some kind of health care? Why wasn't he offered food? Why wasn't he offered housing? Why did he have to ultimately end up in this situation 10 years after this? Okay. Like he thinks this long criminal record, this terrorizing again and again, right? He in some other tweet, he said like, he's like essentially spending all this time terrorizing the city for years and years. He's able to see 10 years of this, right? From a guy who used to be totally normal. And he's not asking the questions that need to be asked, right? He's not asking, why wasn't he allowed some other way out? Why was this kind of spiraling out of control, progressively getting worse and worse and worse, and nobody intervened? And by intervene, I don't mean beat him with a baton. I don't mean imprison him for 5 years, right? I mean, get to the point where before arrests have to happen, right? He's also like, there was this warrant out for his arrest since November 2021. He punched a woman, it seems, on the train. And it's amazing to me how that gets presented as something that is like beyond comment, as if the number one comment should not be, isn't that weird? We have an 18-month warrant for a guy that can't be found. And the reason why he can't be found is he doesn't have a home. Don't you think there's a connection here with all these items? Don't we think this endpoint with him dying at 30, isn't there a causal chain somewhere? It doesn't have to be, look, not every causal chain that looks like this ends with this particular link. But the reason why we're talking about this specific causal chain is because this specific causal chain, this specific instantiation of a man who goes from being normal to mentally ill to homeless, this specific instantiation of this specific kind of causal chain just happened to end in a way where we have video evidence of what looks like, to me, a murder. Like it's just so superficial, isn't it? Right? This is as deep. Right? I heard this said about Ben Shapiro before, and I thought it was nice. Ben Shapiro and Richard Hanania, right? Deep as a puddle of piss. This is a virgin writing about threesomes, right? This is somebody that you could just tell, right? He's never been in situations, right? He doesn't know how anything really plays out, but he's been so fixated on this his whole life, right? Watching from the sidelines, imagining crime, right? Imagining problems in the world, right? And imagining what's going to happen if they ever come to me. How am I going to respond? What happens when finally I am tested as a man? Am I going to flip out? Am I going to be able to make out of it alive? Is someone going to have to get hurt? And, the reason why conservatives tend to be so kind of They tend to be so sympathetic to, for instance, Daniel Penny and other types like that, or George Zimmerman. Is they always imagine themselves like, look, I could be in that situation, and you know what? I would be scared enough that I would not behave any differently, right? So this is what we need. We need the Richard Hananias or Hananias. We need the Ben Shapiros, and we need all the conservative types to be forced, right, into some sort of, I don't want to call it like a labor re-education camp, but it would be good if they could be in some kind of camp for like 10 years. It's just a neighborhood, guys, right? It's just a neighborhood where people don't look like you, and you're going to have to learn how to deal with people and deal with situations that you're not used to, so that over time what happens is you actually acclimate to and get a better understanding of the entire range of behaviors and potentialities and problems and solutions and styles of escalation and de-escalation. All those things could finally be in your head, okay? So you don't have to actually write, Richard, from the perspective of someone that has zero experience with anything that you're writing about. You could actually start from baseline assumptions that make some kind of sense. Because overwhelmingly, the craziest thing about all this is just how totally lacking in common sense all of this is. And I promised I was going to share a story here, right? And you'll have my face and you'll have Richard's face next to mine as I share the story. So I used to work actually in a school. Well, I worked in many different schools a very long time ago. A very long time ago, I was working in a school in the Lower East Side, and there were kids coming from the Baruch houses, right, housing projects in the Lower East Side, from the Alphabet City, which is a little bit, I guess, a little bit north of the Lower East Side, Alphabet City projects, right? All these kids, right, they were coming into the school, and I had to deal like with kind of like the let's just call it like the worst case scenarios. And I remember like being outside with some kids, right? These are kids that I knew. It was about maybe 6 or 8 of them, I forget. And I knew these kids, and I knew also that they had issues with some other kids. A couple of those kids were in a local. It wasn't like a Bloods in the way they would think of it. It was like a Bloods affiliated gang. And there was another kid that I also knew, but he wasn't actually at my school. And they saw each other across the street. They exchanged some words. The kid across the street, also that I knew, he crossed the street to the kids. And before I knew it, I was in a situation where I was pinning this kid down, right? So he was either 15 or 16 years old, right? Just imagine this, like he's a big fucking black kid. He was trying to get at this other kid in the group, right? Kid that wasn't in my school, this little fucking white kid. And you could tell every time that he was not in his medication, he was a totally different person, right? If he's on his medication, you would not have any incidents with this kid. He'd always be sitting there doing his work. If sometimes when I was going over to that school, I would go, I would tutor him. And he was listening there. There was no problems at all. When he's off his meds, remember when I said you could tell by people's faces? I'm not just saying that. This kid, when he was off his meds, his face he would be sitting there like, and he could be doing that for an hour straight, 2 hours straight. Somebody comes up to ask him to do this. He's like, you, fuck off. I don't want to fuck off. Like totally off. Big fucking badass black kid. He wants to get at this tiny, but also really badass white kid, right? So this is one of the few white kids. So the big black kid is trying to get the tiny white kid. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to have to like get this guy down and get him down. For 15 minutes straight, I'm essentially just trying to get security, right? I'm trying to get somebody to deal with the situation, right? Because I know right away that, first of all, I'm not going to put a kid into a chokehold. And I'm not going to do it despite the fact that this kid is bigger than me. He's off his meds. And despite the fact that, unlike, right, again, to go back to Daniel Penny, he had 3, potentially 4 other men, adult fucking men next to him that could help him restrain this tiny homeless guy. I don't have anybody helping me. Like, of course, like sometimes kids, they want to help, but I'm not going to have a fucking kid help me restrain another kid, right? They're not supposed to be involved, right? If you're in a situation where you're the adult, or alternatively, you're in a situation where you're the only sane person involved, sorry, if you want to be a hero, such as me pinning this kid down, or you on the train trying to like, get this guy to stop spazzing out, you suddenly have a ton of responsibilities, okay? And I was very aware of my responsibilities. No chokeholds, no crazy shit like that. If I have to get him down and push him down and keep him down, I'm going to do that. And that's what I did. I was extremely sore the next day, right? At the time, I was deadlifting, I was squatting, I was running pretty much every single day. And still, I was sore as fuck after those 15 minutes of just like trying to keep the kid down and making sure that other kids aren't trying to come to help me, okay? I'm the adult in that situation. Daniel Penny is essentially the adult in that situation. If you want to be a hero, you're going to have to take on the responsibility and the liabilities of a hero. And guess what? 15 minutes pass. I'm able to finally offload responsibility to an authority figure. I'm not a dumb fuck. I know exactly what my job is. My job is to find that authority figure that actually deals with this, right? I'm not there to deal with kids having fights. 15 minutes come by. I see them kind of like languorously kind of like walking in like, oh, what's going on, guys? Just typical like fucking like pig cop shit. The same fucking pig shit that you see in the subways, not doing anything fucking useful. Just pig fucking behavior. Pig fucking behavior on the subways, pig fucking behavior in the fucking schools. I'm fucking acting like a cop. They're spending such a long time languorously walking over as if there's not a real situation here, right? With kids that are little gang members. This was a guy off his meds. The next day, he didn't want to sue me. His mom wasn't mad at me. The next day, when he was on his meds, well, actually, it wasn't really the next day. He actually took a couple of days off from school after that. But when he came back like a few days later on his meds, I saw him across the street. We said hello. We talked. We acted as if nothing happened. Because guess what, bitch? From my perspective, bitch, nothing did fucking happen, bitch. Back then, you were not on your meds. Okay? You were not on your fucking meds. You were not in your right mind. I'm not going to hold that shit against you, stupid fuck. Like, this is not a person in his right mind, you dumb fuck. Isn't it like so kind of amazing that I could be in that situation? And of course, it would be like, well, of course, Alex, you'd be sued. You're white. You're the only white person there. You're pinning down a black kid. He's screaming. You're waiting for the cops to come. No, I had a good relationship with this kid. I had a good relationship with the other kids that he was trying to fight. I had good relationships. So when I was walking around the next day, the week after, 5 weeks after, every single day you treat anew. Okay? You know how to escalate. You know how to de-escalate. You be enough in these kinds of situations, and guess what? It's not going to matter, right? You're not going to overreact. You're going to know exactly what you should do, exactly what you shouldn't do. Instead, we have a Marine here who, according to himself, decided to go on an adventure, did not quite get the adventure he was hoping for, came back to New York City, to a rougher neighborhood than he's used to compared to fucking West Islip, West Babylon, New York, gets himself into a situation because he's too excited. Okay? Again, nobody sued me. Nobody went after me. Nobody was mad at me. Why would they be? I did what I was supposed to do, right? And I did it with people that I built trust with. There was no attempt to build any kind of trust. There was no attempt to do any kind of de-escalation. There was no attempt to get anyone to back down. It was just literally a murder caught on video, right? And for all the fucks out there that disagree with me, put up your own little fucking background. I want to know, what neighborhood are you from? And not only where are you from, but where do you live right now? Because a lot of people that look like me, what they do is they get a little bit of money, they get a little bit of educational attainment, they get a little bit of professional advancement, and they just move out and they never see any of the stuff that they grew up with ever, ever, ever again. Right? So Forget about your past. I want to know, where are you from right now? What do you do right now? What does your neighborhood look like? Do you walk around at night? Do you walk around during the day? Are you fearful? Do you clutch your purse? Because you could tell this guy is definitely wearing a fucking purse. One point that he raises that is correct is the fact that we are in this kind of arrested development state, right? Where kids who maybe would have had to mature maybe in a way that's kind of like more congruent with their biology, maybe a little bit earlier, they now have this like arrested childhood, like well into their 20s and perhaps even beyond. But the irony is that, perhaps the reason why this fascinates him so much is this is exactly the state that he is in, right? Like this is look, this is what a child says. This is what a child writes, right? It's crazy. This is baby shit. This is baby shit, right? This is easy ass, easy peasy lemon squeezy baby shit. And he doesn't get it, right? So he himself is in this like totally arrested childhood. I really want to see all these types, and this actually applies to liberals too, obviously. Forget, just penning up conservatives in these neighborhoods. Put all the liberals, put all the Robin DiAngelos, right? Because she's been that's the thing. She grew up in some of this rough and tumble environment, was homeless, living in cars when she was small, had hunger. So I respect that part of Robin DiAngelo. But by the time that she's writing White Fragility, she's already a big name diversity trainer. She already self-admittedly moved out of these neighborhoods and is now in these kinds of like almost exclusively white surroundings. Put them back. Remind her, put them in these neighborhoods, right? Have them live there for not 3 months, not 6 months. Give them 5 years. Give them 10 years. And I guarantee you that these kinds of stupid assumptions, they're simply not going to exist anymore. Like this is how conservatives want to talk about social engineering as a fear, but this is how you do real social engineering, right? Get the virgins writing about threesomes and BDSM and all this other shit. Get them out. We need to replace this professional writerly class with something else altogether, because right now this is not cutting it. The people that would have the perspectives that are valuable, they don't tend to come from the places that we need them to come from. They tend to be what you see in front of you right now. And it's fucking embarrassing. So, I mean, what else is there to say, right? 2007 to 2013, 6 years of normalcy. After a while, all those problems, all those traumas, they caught up with him. And guess what? The social contract was violated. He was supposed to have received some kind of help. He was supposed to have avoided, what was it, like 40 arrests or whatever it was, right? For public drinking. Mostly it was like fare evasion and public drinking and whatever. He should not have been there on the train screaming about being hungry, being thirsty, and saying essentially, therefore, I am now desperate, right? Everybody always wants to focus on that final little link in the causal chain. Look, he's saying that he's desperate now. Look, he's behaving like a cornered animal. Look, we could now do whatever the fuck that we want to do so that we don't feel fearful. We could, if we feel fearful, if we think this person is more dangerous than he is, we could do whatever we want, because we, in our little world, the world of Richard Hanania or Hanania, don't exactly know how to pronounce his name, that world, right, it needs to be protected at all costs, right? We need to be sheltered. We don't know what's out there. It's so scary. We've been watching the same headlines since the 90s, but we haven't actually lived those headlines. So these are our imaginations. These are our imaginings. And now I'm going to take my imagination, and it's so important, right? His imagination, his fucking imagination is so goddamn important and special and vast, right? He had so much leisure in his life that there was no space for anything except what can you fill this big fucking empty imagination with? What can you fill it up with? What can you fill it with? And it's full of cobwebs. It's full of fears, right? And if you infringe upon these imaginations, we're going to fucking kill you, right? Don't make me scared. Don't make me scared. I don't know how dangerous you are. I have never seen somebody screaming around me. I have never felt that my masculinity was ever tested in any situation. So if I overreact after systematically keeping all of this out of my life. I don't have to see this. I don't want to see this. Fuck off. After keeping all this out of my own life, I'm going to allow my imagination to take over, and I'm going to fucking kill you. Right? I mean, there's no other way to view it, right? So, Dick Hanania, right? It was nice knowing you, but you really are fucking sub 50 IQ, right? You really are just dumb.